Are we still seeing my green screen? Did that mess anything up? Okay, thanks. Hey, Justin. We will go ahead and start in 1 minute just to kind of, make sure that we stay on time. All right, well, I've got 102, so let's go ahead and get started. I know some folks are still coming in, but that's okay if they come in a little bit late. I just wanted to welcome everybody to this workshop this afternoon on combining climate mitigation goals with adaptation and resilience goals. I think today, if you haven't been on one of these or followed along on one of these workshops yet, they're a little different in that we're purposefully combining folks who are on sector committees who are really focused in on specific actions and strategies that are really concrete that need to happen to reduce our greenhouse gas goals. And we've also got folks who have been in advisory group conversations who are thinking more critically about kind of the big picture and where we're headed and the consequences of some of these things. So I would just invite you to kind of keep that in mind as we kind of move through this discussion and try to keep that balance and kind of try to benefit from those two different perspectives as we go forward. We do have just a brief agenda that I'll show that just to kind of keep us on track and kind of make sure everybody's clear on what we're going to cover today. In just a second, I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves, and we'll spend as much time as we need on that. And then I'll have a few background slides on just what we had in mind in terms of the theme of this workshop. And so Colleen and I will do those. And then we'll spend most of our time just kind of letting you all talk to one another. We're here to kind of really improve and fill gaps on strategies and actions that are happening out there. So that's most of the meeting. And then we'll have a couple things to say about next steps, and then public comment as always, because we do want to hear from the public. Just for a second, I'm going to move over and make sure some of my folks are in the attendees, and I'm moving them over to panelists. Okay, so I think we're good there. So just to jump right in, I would love it if we could kind of go through some introductions quickly. So what we're asking is that everybody kind of tries to hold it to 1 minute. We've got several folks on the line today. So again, let's see, Christy, I'm moving you up. So I just asked that you kind of just obviously mention your name and your affiliation professionally, and then if you're on the task force, a sector committee, or an advisory group, kind of where you're sitting in terms of our process. And then third, something that you're looking forward to talking about in the discussion today. And again, try to hold it to 1 minute, if at all possible. So I'll go ahead and just kind of work down the list that I have on my screen, just so we can all stay organized. So Alex Kolker, would you mind starting us off on just kind of the introduction part?
Sure. So my name is Alex Kolker, and I'm an associate professor at the Louisiana University Marine Consortium. For those of you that don't know us, we do a lot of things, but mostly we function as the Marine Lab for the state of Louisiana. I'm a coastal geologist, and my PhD is actually in marine and atmospheric science. I've long looked at sea level rise and how it impacts the coast, but also, given my background in marine and atmospheric science, I've always had a penchant for climate and climate change and climate dynamics. I'm a member of the Science Advisory Group, and I guess I'm looking forward to a really good discussion, and I'm looking forward to seeing how all of these pieces on the climate side, how everything fits together. It's a fascinating task that we've been asked to fill, and I'm just looking to see how everything fits together and see what might work.
Thanks, Alex. Buck, can you go next?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Buck Vandersteen. I'm the director of the Louisiana Forestry Association, an organization of forest landowners, loggers, and the forest products industry. We help the landowners, loggers, and industry be stewards of this 15 million, over half the area of Louisiana, manage this great forest resource that we have, and very interested in how we can incorporate keeping our forests as forests while using environmentally friendly wood to sequester carbon. Thank you.
Thank you, Buck. Justin Kozak, can you go next?
Sure thing. Justin Kozak. I'm with the Center for Planning Excellence. I am a member of the Agriculture, Forestry, Conservation, and Waste Committee. I'm excited about this conversation today because I think of all of the cross-sector meetings we have, I think there's the most low-hanging fruit in this meeting. I think there's a lot of opportunities to merge our significant resilience and adaptation needs with mitigation opportunities.
Great. That is great. Thank you. Alex, other Alex, can you go next, please?
Certainly. Alex Pizorski. I'm the executive director of Ride New Orleans. We are an advocacy group in the New Orleans region focused on better and more effective public transit, and have enjoyed this process very much. I'm honestly haven't had a lot of time to get into the workshops for this month, so I'm more looking forward to just hearing what's going on at this point, and don't necessarily have the background yet to say exactly what I'm focused on for this particular workshop. But within the Transportation Committee, we've been looking at a lot at how the state and others can better support public transit to make it more effective from an equity perspective in terms of providing access to opportunity, and also more as a transportation option that more people can choose and take advantage of, and drive down those single occupancy vehicles in the transportation sector, and how much that's driving greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Thanks for being here. Bethany Stitch, can you go next?
Sure, I'm Bethany Stitch. I'm the director of UNO's Transportation Institute, and the Institute itself covers all modes, both active freight and passenger transportation, all three. My focus is primarily on freight transportation, logistics, supply chain, and economic development.
Thank you, Bethany. Andronika, can you go next?
Can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I was having problems getting the phone to sync. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry for running late. Andronika Morris with Housing NOLA, the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance, and Housing Louisiana. And my focus on today is wanting to talk about making sure that we align housing needs with the absolute needs that we have to address climate change, and making sure that those two things that I know work really well together are actually addressed in a way that makes sense and is sustainable and truly shifts the narrative around these two issues.
Thank you. That sounds good. Camille Stagg, can you go next?
Hi, my name is Camille Stagg. I'm a research ecologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, and I study coastal wetlands. Most of my career has been spent studying carbon cycling in coastal wetlands and also restoration of wetlands. And so I'm really excited today to hear how coastal restoration can be incorporated into the solutions for climate mitigation.
Thank you. Chief Shirelle, can you go next?
Hi, everyone. Really glad to be here with you all today. Of course, I'm Chief Shirelle Parfait Dardar, Chief of the Grand Cayuga-Lake Band of Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw. I am the Indigenous representative on the task force, and I'm also seated as the chairwoman for the Louisiana Governor's Office of Indian Affairs Native American Commission, and I am seated on the Equity Advisory Group. What I'm really looking forward to, of course, today is a natural process of climate mitigation and adaptation, and of course, addressing the longstanding issues of basically communities of color in the state of Louisiana, being utilized as sacrifice zones in the name of progress and projects. And I'd like to see how we can get better, right, and do better for those things. Thank you.
Thank you. Faye Matthews, can you go next?
Good afternoon, everyone. Faye Matthews with the National Wildlife Federation. I am a member of the Legal Advisory Group. And something that I look forward to talking about today is a lot aligned with everyone else's comment. How do we make space to have conversations about things that are usually siloed and be really intentional about talking about things in a way that allows goals to advance collectively and not in separate ways as they've had historically. So I really look forward to hearing from everyone.
Thank you, Faye. Ginacampo.
Good afternoon. I'm Ginacampo. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Community Development. I'm a member of the Building, Housing, and Land Use Committee, and very interested in hearing the conversation about the intersection of the work of the task force with respect to climate mitigation, and specifically with respect to recovery and recovery planning.
Thank you, Gina. Gray Stream, can you go next, please?
Sure. Thanks, Charles. Thanks, everybody. Gray Stream Companies. We've been focused on long-term land stewardship for several generations, both agriculturally, forest properties, and also wetland properties, especially. Stream Wetland Services is a company that's rebuilt and restored tens of thousands of acres of Louisiana coastal wetlands. So that's something that's been critically important to us, and some of the topics around how that can dovetail with some of the goals that we're working on as a task force here are especially interesting. We're also private investors in innovation and in trying to grow Louisiana's economy. And a project that we're currently working on, which is, I think, one of the primary reasons that led to my involvement with my committee, is the development of geologic sequestration projects in Louisiana. And that company is Gulf Coast Sequestration. Today, I'm happy to have an opportunity to hear from folks across several different committees and advisory groups, task forces. Mostly have been attending either kind of the at-large meeting or some of the manufacturing committee meetings. So, excited to kind of hear some other perspectives from some of the other groups today and see how we can start to tie some of these things together. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Harrietragoning, can you go next?
I can, Charles, thank you. I'm Harrietragoning. I am the director of an organization called NUMO, the New Urban Mobility Alliance, housed at the World Resources Institute in Washington. I'm on the Transportation Committee, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the conversations from other committees and other advisory groups. One of the things we know for sure is that for the foreseeable future, Louisiana remains in the crosshairs of climate-related disaster risk, and money both to abate that risk and recover from disasters as well as to prevent them is going to continue to be available. And I think trying to solve the many challenges facing the state going forward can be able to count on some of that funding to be able to turn the battleship that is the state of Louisiana, trying to prepare for the future.
Thank you very much. Jeff Arnold, would you go next?
Sure. Jeff Arnold, I'm the CEO of the Association of Louisiana Electric Cooperatives. We have most of our electric cooperatives are members of our association, and I represent all of the electric cooperatives in Louisiana on the National Rural Electric Co-op Association. Here really to listen and learn, obviously with the climate that we've had in the last year with regards to 5 hurricanes and 2 ice storms. The co-ops are very interested in learning and moving forward to mitigate some of the risks that are involved with that. I still have one electric cooperative on the most southern portions of its area running their substations off of diesel generators, and that's since Hurricane Laura. So looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say today.
Thank you. Kim Marisek, can you go next?
Sure, thanks. My name is Kim Marisek. I'm the Director of Planning with the Capital Region Planning Commission. We're a regional planning district and metropolitan planning organization, and I sit on the Land Use, Building, and Housing Sector Committee. So I'm really interested today in talking about just how this work intersects with some of the work we're doing related to transportation planning and regional watershed planning efforts.
Thank you, Kim. Christy Trail.
Hi, I'm Christy Trail. I'm the Executive Director of the Pontchartrain Conservancy. We are a nonprofit focused on environmental research in Southeast Louisiana. And I'm interested in hearing more about some of the research opportunities that come out of this, looking at different climate mitigation strategies.
Thank you, Christy. Mark Goodson.
Good afternoon, Mark Goodson. I'm a principal with CSRS. We're a Louisiana-based planning and design and program management consulting firm. Excuse me. I serve on the Land Use Buildings and Housing Committee, and just really interested to participate in the cross-sector discussion and talk about how the different systems that make up our state can be leveraged and adapted to produce outcomes that are better for all of our communities.
Thank you, Mark. Richard Keim.
Hi, I'm Richard Keim. I'm a professor in the School of Renewable Natural Resources at LSU. I am a forest and wetland hydrologist, and I work on better understanding how forests and forest soils interact with the water cycle. I do a lot of work mainly with forested wetlands, both coastal and bottomland hardwoods, and I'm very interested in particular in how water policy and forest management intersect. I'm currently eastbound on I-12.
Thanks, Richard. Robbie Toombs.
Yes, I'm Robbie Toombs. I'm a regional manager for Resource Management Service. We manage about 240,000 acres in East Central Louisiana, LaSalle Parish, Catahoula, and Caldwell. I'm also a member of Buck's organization, Louisiana Forestry Association, and I serve with Buck on the Agricultural, Forestry, Conservation, and Waste Committee.
Thank you. And Tom Broom.
Good afternoon, Richard. Thank you for hosting this joint session. I am an executive account manager for DANOS. I also serve on the Dean's Advisory Council for the College of Coast and Environment at LSU and the Advisory Council for Louisiana Sea Grant. I'm a member of the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, Restore Retreat, America's Wetlands Foundation, and the Coastal Conservation Association. I serve on the Mining and Oil and Gas Committee, along with my colleague Christy Trail. And like many others who have introduced themselves before me, I'm looking forward to hear what the other committees have been up to and looking for some common ground that we can agree upon as a goal to take back to the larger task force. And I've been getting messages that I have a very weak internet, so I'm going to go off video and mute myself until I'm called upon again.
All right. No problem, Tom. And jump in even if your video doesn't want to work too. Thank you. Did I miss anybody on my list that's here that wants to introduce himself? Okay, then Colleen, would you mind introducing yourself before we kind of finish up?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Colleen Mchugh, Senior Planner at the Water Institute of the Gulf, and we are working closely with the Governor's Office on the planning team for the climate initiatives. So I'll be furiously taking notes during the conversation today and helping Charles facilitate the discussion.
Great. Thanks everybody. I loved everything everybody had to say about why they're here. I think those are definitely what we're here to do. So we've got a good group. Just to quickly kind of put today's meeting into the context of our whole process, we are in the action development phase. And so if you're on a sector committee, you know this well. We had a meeting in mid-March to kind of talk about specific strategies and actions. There is a open window for submittals from the public and anybody who wants to submit something through the end of this month. And so we've still got a couple weeks after this meeting to kind of refine and kind of make these actions better. Sector committees will meet again in mid-May once that window is closed and we have kind of all the ideas on the table so we can kind of see what's out there, see what's left to do, and we'll go from there. Let me see, I've got a chat going. Okay, Kent Rogers is here too. Kent, I'm gonna try to promote you to let me see if I can get you working here real quick before we get into this meeting more. Sorry, buddy. Kent, are you able to say hello and introduce yourself now that I've moved you up.
Okay, got the mic working. Still
Great.
trying to get the video. Kent Rogers, I'm the executive director for the Northwest Louisiana Council of Governments. We're the MPO for the Shreveport. We also are a participant on the Watershed Initiative for Region 1, and do some other environmental work in terms of brownfields work and some other initiatives. So I think it'd be interesting to see how the various different infrastructure types of programs can interact with the environmental programs and try to help build a better environment for all of us. And I serve on the Transportation Committee.
Thank you very much, Kent. And sorry, it took me a minute to get you on the right level there. So thanks for being here. So in addition to being in an action development process, we are doing a parallel workflow where we are also working through the refinement of how do you evaluate strategies and portfolios. And so next week, if you're on the advisory group, you should be getting a survey from us it's going to contain some hypothetical scenarios. So we're going to compile some strategies together into scenarios that aren't going to be adopted as the plan, but we hope will provide some good insights into kind of how we're thinking about things. What are some of the limitations? What are some of just the ideas that can come out of seeing that? And we're also going to be kind of using that process to make sure that our ability to kind of grade, if you will, the different actions and strategies that are coming out of this process against the fundamental objectives is kind of working well. And so we're going to be kind of talking through and working through the criteria we're going to use in that process. And then at the end of the month or early next month, after that goes out, we're going to have some office hours with the planning team. So Water Institute and GOCA folks, if any advisory group members have questions about the assignment that they've been given, we can kind of talk through it and make sure that it works well and makes sense for everybody. So again, today, just kind of getting back to today's actual meeting. We are still in the action phase, but today is all about actions. We are here to improve proposals on actions, and we're here to identify maybe new action proposals now that we've got this cross-disciplinary group pulled together. So we're hoping to kind of get into as much detail as we want to, kind of with benefiting from all the different folks in the room. And this is our 6th meeting of this type. So today's the last one, but you can go back and see all the other ones on YouTube if you're interested in that. And these are the other topics that we've hit over the past couple days as we've gone through this. And so again, just to kind of reiterate, the desired outcomes today are to advance the actions, identify areas in need of specific focus to ensure that there's long-term reliability and resilience of some of our systems, and identify ways to further the overall implementation of Louisiana's climate programs through this meeting. And then the ground rules are really just pretty basic. It's just we want to hear from you guys. We want you to participate. We want you to try to be a little aware if you've talked more than your share, and just kind of share the stage with other folks, and then to try to stay action oriented so that we can have more than just a good conversation and kind of take it somewhere. So then in terms of the topic of the day, I do want to do just a little bit of background just to kind of make sure that we're all kind of thinking similarly about this. And I know we've got a great group here, so this is not something that's going to come as news to anybody, but I do think that this particular topic, as some of you have mentioned earlier, is going to be a really important one. I think one of the things we like to stress in this work that we've been doing together is that addressing greenhouse gas emissions also presents opportunities. And some of these opportunities relate to doing new things that are really exciting, but some are also about opportunities to help address some of our other extremely important problems that are facing our state. And one of those big problems that we have to address at every opportunity is our current disaster vulnerability and our future increased vulnerability that is part of the reality of where we are today, and also of what climate change is going to bring in the future. One of our big goals as a state is to incorporate means to build resilience across all of government, both as part of our daily practice and little bit by bit type measures, but also looking for ways to inspire transformative changes. I think the topic we're going to discuss today, which is combining mitigation with adaptation and resilience goals, should absolutely be part of Louisiana's brand when it comes to this issue. While we may be a little late to the game on the mitigation side, we unfortunately have more experience with disasters than almost anyone else, and we are way ahead of a lot of states when it comes to actually implementing adaptation measures, and some of our planning processes are pretty well developed. So, just kind of, again, I just feel like our ability to squeeze every drop of resilience and adaptation gain from our mitigation work is what should really set Louisiana apart when it comes to climate mitigation policy. I think that's going to really differentiate us. And I just want to thank everybody who's able to be here today and help us work through this issue together. Just for a little more background, this past month and a half with these meetings we've had really great conversations about the specific actions that we need to take or could take or should think about to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And it's been really inspiring and good. But what we've gotten away from explicitly talking about are some of the impacts from climate change that these actions that we're talking about are trying to ward off. And so today's conversation, I feel like, is the perfect time to bring those impacts back to the forefront as we think about how to meet our adaptation needs, which are, as we all know, especially great in Louisiana, while we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. I think it's also a good time to remind ourselves of the diversity of climate impacts that we need to adapt to, that this is not all about coastal flooding, although that is a big part of it. These 4 buckets you see up here is from the National Climate Assessment for the Southeast, and I think they all resonate in Louisiana. And these are just that our cities and their residents are vulnerable to climate change impacts that will occur to infrastructure and human health, particularly from increased heat, flooding, vector-borne diseases. That too, the flood frequency, extreme rainfall, and sea level rise are going to affect life, property, infrastructure, and business activities along coastal areas. That 3, natural ecosystems that provide multiple societal benefits are going to be transformed by climate change through things like changes to temperature extremes, both hot and cold, again, sea level rise, hurricanes, flood, droughts, warming oceans. All these things are going to change ecosystems. That there are specific risks for rural communities that from heat and from changing seasonal climates that are going to affect those working in agriculture or forestry industries and other walks of life that are going to be impacted by these impacts in rural communities. And then what's not on the screen is kind of a number 5, but could have been squeezed up there, is that while people from every walk of life in Louisiana are going to be affected by these impacts, we know that in particular, the negative consequences of climate change are going to fall disproportionately on those who are already vulnerable, including those with the fewest resources and typically low income and communities of color. And so we just want to kind of recognize all these disparate impacts as we're kind of thinking about integrating these different approaches. And obviously these impacts are related to emissions. And if we don't take action on emissions, the risks will increase. So emissions are driving up temperatures, and the higher temperatures are causing all these fundamental changes to the Earth systems that we're talking about. On the flip side, as we lower emissions and lower the potential impact, we're also able to lower our adaptation needs. And so, or in the case of Louisiana, when it comes to the coast in particular, we can see that the adaptation needs we're already taking can be more effective and last longer, in addition to being, less great of a need. And so I think finally, just in terms of background for this topic, before we kind of let you guys kind of get into it, when we talk about combining adaptation and resilience need with our mitigation efforts, I want to make sure that we're not only thinking about the different types of impacts that we need to deal with, but also the interconnected and multidimensional nature of resilience itself, which I think almost everybody on the introductions already kind of hit on. So not only might we want to be thinking about, meeting multiple types of hazards, but also thinking about meeting multiple types of co-benefits along the way. So there are a lot of different definitions of resilience out there, but they all try to acknowledge, basically 2 types of threats, the shock events that are sudden and acute, and more chronic stressors that are persistent or at least longer lasting. And these definitions also want to recognize that it's about, yes, it's about surviving those threats, but it's also about adapting and growing in the face of those challenges. And as we're thinking about our successes or shortcomings in achieving resilience, we've got to be thinking across multiple dimensions that are interconnected. And I think we've got a really good interdisciplinary group here today to do that. And I would just say, the last little example is just looking at both these 2 diagrams on the slide. we know that improving resilience means tougher infrastructure, but that's just one of the things that it means. And so a lot of these other things need to be complementary. And so that's just kind of the last background piece I wanted to put up today to kind of get us started. And so these key questions and discussion topics were kind of what we started with as a planning team, to kind of, as we were thinking about some things that might be interesting to talk about. We've got federal opportunities. I think somebody raised that already on the call. Alignment of our goals. So we already heard a couple people talk about the Watershed Initiative and some other recovery type goals, co-benefits that result from that alignment. And then we also felt like there were some specific applications for the energy system that might be important. And I think I'm going to go ahead and add transportation system as well on there that we should probably be thinking about. So these topics were sent around to you earlier, and they're on the document that we sent. And so I hope I hope it helped you kind of start thinking about this topic, and that you refer to it as we go forward. Yeah, so again, so I think what I wanted to do is really ground today's meeting, though, in specific actions and concrete steps that are being discussed and worked on right now. And a lot of folks mentioned in their introduction that they really wanted to hear kind of what was going on in other committees. And so I would love to leave this slide up. These are some of the actions that we heard in all the different meetings that we felt like needed to come to this group. But I would love to start the discussion just by inviting some members to kind of lift up some of the actions or strategies that have come up in your committee meetings that really exemplify the combination of meeting mitigation goals with adaptation goals. Justin said there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here, and I'd love to kind of make sure we're seeing all of that and putting it out there. So does anybody want to just kind of lift something up that's come up in one of their meetings to kind of get us started and let us hear what folks are discussing? Thanks, Bethany, please.
This is just an easy one because it just came out the other day, and so it's fresh on my mind. But Port of New Orleans has a clean truck replacement program, and they've had it since 2017. It's been extraordinarily successful, but it's never capped out on the amount of funds that are available. So basically what happens is if you're running a truck in and out of the Port of New Orleans, and it's an old truck and it pollutes a lot, you can apply for a grant that's either up to 50% of the purchase price of the truck or up to $35,000. And just so you know, a new truck is somewhere between $130,000. So we're not really coming anywhere near that 50% mark yet. But they've replaced 48 short haul drayage trucks, reduced the particulate emissions by 96% in those by the trucks that were purchased, which is the equivalent of 73,000 cars off the road, and reduced local carbon dioxide emissions by 542 tons per year. So here's a program that exists, but it exists it's very small, it's in isolation, and we know that $35,000 doesn't cover the actual expense of what the drivers are incurring by buying a new truck. So in my world, some low-hanging fruit is creating some kind of transportation equipment zone, which is similar to what we used to call opportunity zones, where you reduce, eliminate, or defer the taxes on those capital expenses, the capital gains of those trucks. Have more ports, Port of Baton Rouge, engage in this program because we know it's successful. And so engage with the terminal operators so that if you have a more fuel efficient vehicle, you can skip the line waiting to get into because time is always money with truck drivers because they only have so many hours of service. So that's something that exists that can be expanded. And with the exception of whatever you decide to do about a transportation opportunity zone or whatever you want to call it, it really isn't, it doesn't cost anything. It's negotiating with the terminal operators, incentive to cleaner brewery trucks, to work with the other ports, to get them to engage in the clean truck program, to work with the drayage industry itself, to tell them that, yeah, we know 35,000 doesn't, but we're going to do these other things that will help you. You'll be able to make more money because you'll be able to make more turns. You're not sitting in congestion. We'll defer your taxes until the value is down to whatever the value of your previous truck is, however they want to work that. But there's a way to get more people engaged in this and bring those numbers down. And we know it works. So to me, that is the definition of low-hanging fruit.
Thanks, Bethany. Are you thinking that the way that it touches on adaptation and resilience stuff has to do with some of the air quality associated with those cleaner trucks, or how would you kind of see that connection there?
Yeah, basically it's all about air quality for two reasons. One, it's a cleaner burning truck, and if you can work with those terminal operators to get that movement more, you don't have as much idle, and what you do have idling, right, you have cleaner burning fuel. So to me, that's just a really simple pulling a bunch of people in a room and trying to expand a program that we know is successful when it comes to emissions.
Thanks so much. Does anybody else have another example they wanted to kind of help set the stage with?
Sure. Justin Kozak here. One of the things we talked about in Agriculture, Forestry, Conservation, and Waste Committee is conservation of natural areas, expansion of natural areas through restoration. Wetlands and riparian areas store lots and lots of carbon for quite a while, but they require some protection. The reason they cross list is because by reconnecting to a floodplain, reconnecting to these riparian areas, it's flood storage, and you can reduce flooding downstream. These natural areas also have nutrient cycling, so you can reduce runoff from agricultural fields and other processes. So that is complementary with Gulf Dead Zone mitigation approaches. The approach is very complementary with Louisiana Watershed Initiative and flood risk reduction efforts statewide. With biodiversity benefits, protecting riparian areas mitigates the impact of increased heat on aquatic species. The list goes on, and it's low-hanging fruit because it's something that you don't need a technological advancement to do. You just need to put some protections in place and have folks capitalize on it. And if it's in urban or metropolitan areas and the community participates in the community rating system, you could also add that green space to your CRS points and bring down flood insurance rates for everybody that lives there.
Great, thanks, Justin. And Buck, I'll go to you next. And I'll just say I love it when people use that little raise hand thing. It makes it so much easier to kind of make sure we get people called on. So thanks. And then, so Andronika, why don't you go after Buck?
Thank you, Charles. Talking about our forests, fully integrated from the landowners that are out there. They need the training that is provided from our universities, LSU, Southern, Louisiana Tech, and our community and technical colleges. Extremely beneficial because our forests are generally in rural areas, and this is a great opportunity for underserved landowners to learn more about best management practices and managing the forests. Our ultimate goal is keeping forests as forests, and even in areas where agriculture is shifting from yearly use, many people Louisiana is still adding acreage to forest inventory every year, and our forests are growing far more than what is being utilized. And this presents another opportunity of utilizing wood, capturing the carbon in wood in useful products like building materials, mass timber products. Many people have heard about traditional plywood, lumber, things of that nature. Certainly our paper products also are beneficial uses. And also in many parts of the country, and particularly in Europe, they're looking to our resources to use wood as a substitute for coal and fossil fuels in the form of wood pellets and other biomass. So our integrated process and the low-hanging fruit of this is that it is ongoing today. We have 15 million acres of forests. We have 130,000 men and women engaged in forestry in some capacity. We have a tremendous educational system, an outreach program. What we are needing are more industry to come in to hire our people in rural areas. And that will help with our education goals, with our quality of life and our health and resources. And with our forests, we also gain so much value in air quality, in water, in recreational opportunities, and a good quality of life. And if Robbie Toombs is listening too, Robbie, have I overlooked anything?
Guess not. Sounds good.
I guess we lost him, but that's what I had, Charles.
Thank you very much. Andronika, and then Richard Keim, you can go next after her. Thanks.
Thanks, Charles. So one thing that I wanted to lift up and also kind of tweak a little bit is making sure that when we talk about weatherization and efficiency for residential properties, we're not just talking about homeowners, we're also talking about rental properties. That's an important and necessary distinction because one thing, and again, the potential alignments, there's going to be a great deal of money coming for low-income folks across the state for energy efficiency because of the American Rescue Plan and the December stimulus package. Some of that money is already on the ground in the form of rental assistance that's going to pay utility assistance. Some of it's on the ground, going to be coming in the form of a huge additional LIHEAP investment. I think it's going to be about $50 million additional that's coming to the state of Louisiana. That's almost double what we normally get in a LIHEAP allocation. And getting that to go to not just to paying the utility companies, but also to weatherize these homes. And while we have seen great strides in changes to code as well as new standards for new construction post-Katrina, we also have to make sure that we're looking at retrofitting existing homes, folks' homes, for whatever reason, be it rental or home ownership, homes that they own, that house is energy efficient. And we're not seeing the investments because, number one, it'll help those homeowners and those renters stabilize. It'll reduce the need for LIHEAP funding in the traditional sense and give us the ability to pour more money into weatherization, but it will also have the impact on reducing our emissions in a very direct way. So it's one of those rare win-wins. But if we're not explicitly calling out, because we're going to get frustrated when there's programs, there's an alignment opportunity, and it's more aimed at rental, and we've said, we want to look at home ownership. And the point is that we do both. It's not either or, it's this and then. And some of them may require that that this body make recommendations that we are more, that the state and our federal partners allow us to make some different choices with those resources. But that's how we get to that. And so that I wanted to make sure that we lifted that up when we're talking about the alignment of potential opportunities and things that the land use committee is already looking at.
Thank you. That's a great example. And that's definitely something that we want to talk about in just a second. I do want to talk about particularly things that are maybe have some federal funding associated with them that we can make sure to, really mobilize on or scale up or something like that. So that's a really good example there. Richard and then Harriet.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to strongly support the earlier comments by our colleagues here on maintenance of forests as forests, and in particular riparian wetlands. And I would like to mention that I think there's a very important consideration in the Watershed Initiative that speaks to that, and we have some opportunities in that ongoing, the developing policy process to further some of those forest and forest carbon goals. The most important thing is that watershed process needs to not only recognize the potential damaging effects of flooding, but it also needs to recognize the potential damaging effects of drought, because the effects of droughts are expected with climate change, and they pose particular threat to the greenhouse gas balances from the forest and all wetlands, because dry wetlands can turn from carbon sinks to carbon sources. We want to avoid that. And so I think it's very important that through the Watershed Initiative, that policies be put in place to ensure provision of water to wetlands. the other reason that I wanted to mention about that is that includes both inland, particularly bottomland hardwood riparian systems, but it also includes coastal systems where salinitic saltwater intrusion is a major threat to greenhouse balance of the ecology of those forests. So, in a nutshell, really think that we should be considering provisioning water to wetlands as an important strategy as part of the Watershed Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Harriet, do you have a comment?
I do. I kind of wanted to play off what Ms. Morris had to say. I was thinking along the same lines, just as an example. A lot of housing is going to be rebuilt post-disaster going forward. So first of all, making sure when we rebuild, we look for the locations to rebuild, not always in the same place if the risk is high, but we think about where are the best sites that might, maybe there are obsolete land uses like, closing school sites or hospital sites or shopping malls or other places that are on high ground, and where you could do relatively dense development, and that could be served by transit and be walkable for people who are living there and near jobs. But when you're rebuilding, so where you put where you rebuild is a question. Energy efficiency, absolutely, but also consider renewables. If you can do solar or wind, think about fortified, the wind resistant standard for that rebuilding. Think about water management, because it's not just one hurricane strike. As you know, a lot of the damage in Louisiana has just been from simply heavy rain. So, always looking to do as much on-site water management as possible, but that you are also going to have opportunities with funds that are about mitigating climate change impacts. That same funding could be used to do all of those things. When you're talking about money to look for energy efficiency opportunities, I'm thinking the state of Louisiana could have a program to retrofit 5% of existing buildings each and every year. That would be a construction industry, a housing construction industry that's bigger than the current housing construction industry. It would employ a lot of people, and you could prioritize, as Ms. Morris suggested, based on air quality impacts and on making the operating cost of the building more affordable. So it's kind of a perpetual motion machine, right? The energy savings would pay back the costs. So really, this is a financing question, but I think that it's an example of the kind of thing that if you can articulate for this entire effort where the state of Louisiana is trying to go, then it's an easy matter to figure out what funding sources you're going to be able to continually plug in to be able to help you go in that direction. So you're not figuring it out every time there's a new pot of money or a new disaster. You're just invoking the playbook that this task force has already created, about the things that you're going to try to do. So that's an example. That's a no-brainer, but no other city or state has announced that kind of a goal, 5% retrofit a year, which is huge employment. And it has all these other wonderful benefits. So anyway, just something to think about, and an example that we could probably find in almost every field that we're talking about, every area, whether it's wetlands or whether it's transportation, to figure out what's the investments we're going to turn to over and over again that have these multiple benefits across the state of Louisiana, and particularly across incomes in Louisiana. Always about more opportunity, more affordability, more sustainability, low carbon.
Great point. Thank you so much. Alex, you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I actually, it's on a little bit on a different note, if I can. On the note of resilience, you brought this up at the beginning, Charles, and I wanted to just maybe expand on this. Where at the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned that we wanted to go through resilience that was beyond just flood risk. Certainly flood risk is something I think a lot about working at a lab down at the edge of the coast. But one thing in terms of resilience that I think we want to talk about that's particularly germane in this sort of COVID world is health resilience. We've heard a lot about during the pandemic about air quality as a potential factor that impacts COVID risks. I've been looking at some of the gridded air quality data that is out there. And, you know, a lot of air pollution follows some of the major population densities in the state of Louisiana. And so I think we want to just add into this conversation when we're talking about resilience in terms of health risks and the potential overlays between health risks, air pollution, and in particular, since we're on the climate panel, air quality issues that are greenhouse gases. So nitrous oxides, things like that, that are both irritants and air quality issues, and which are also greenhouse gases. So I just wanted to bring in this link between health, air quality, and greenhouse gases into this conversation, because I think it's an important piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked a ton about in the state, and I think it should be a part of the conversation moving forward.
Thank you, Alex. Bethany, I'll let you go next.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that Harry's exactly right, and that there are a lot of opportunities. DOD just put out in a summary of their last briefing a movement from shifting from traditional Department of Defense infrastructure to actually hospitals, to articulating and finding the areas where whether it's rural health or urban health, the needs are not being met, and using their knowledge and their infrastructure to build hospitals. So if we have a plan in place, the same is true. Department of Interior is talking about many of the things I hear some of my colleagues on this call talking about. I know one of the things we have is rehabilitate, maximize fragmented forests. That is almost verbatim what they have out of their high-level briefing summary about how do we take these and create them as green, safe green spaces. That's coming out of the Department of Interior. So if we can get this packaged in a way so that it isn't a knee-jerk response, but that we are prepared for this shift, both, and of course I know most about transportation, and we know that sustainability for the first time ever is now a qualification for new projects. So I think if we can either, I mean, as a planner, you know, I have a way of doing things, which is charrettes, a vision plan, and then a strategy related to the expectations coming out of these agencies that would support the things that are coming out of this task force. But if that's the direction we're going, then I think we'll be successful.
Thanks, Bethany. And I do want to kind of stay there for a second. I mean, does anybody have another idea, kind of like Bethany and Harriet just mentioned, about either big goals or visions where the state could be headed that really does bring these two types of issues together, or maybe specific opportunities that Andronika mentioned that are going to be there that maybe will help us get ourselves to a bigger goal that we might need, that we want to kind of put on the table as we kind of think through this?
I would say that, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, please go ahead, Harry. And then I saw Andronika next. So why don't y'all keep going?
I was just going to say that, you know, a lot of the work of LA Safe, it's not statewide, but setting out what those big goals are. I mean, that might be something to put in front of this task force and get some validation of those goals and see what else needs to be added. But they are big things like a robust economy, affordability, you know, sustainability, certainty, you know, whatever those things are. And then, you know, I think this isn't something that you're just going to have one bite at the apple of, but but every single federal program in this administration, I just put into the chat some articles that were published today about how the Department of Transportation is changing the criteria for their discretionary grant programs to focus on equity, to focus on these climate reduction goals. All these criteria are changing. So doing the work now to prepare yourself, for those kinds of projects is critically important. So thinking about, what are those things that don't just get you with the investment one goal achieved, like widening a road, but that get you 4 or 5 things achieved, right? That diversify the transportation options, that make connections, to people who are having a hard time accessing jobs from their location or whatever. I'm just saying that those goals or values are something that we should have in front of us. And then we should work up some example projects that cut across our sectors and where there's also a funding opportunity that we think is imminent or already there. And use the opportunity of this convening of this task force, to do that cross-sector work. Because I think it's a lot easier to have some specific examples, and we learn together by doing it, by putting together some project proposals as opposed to doing something abstract or hypothetical.
Great, thank you. Andronika, did you have a comment as well? Can't hear, you're not.
Got it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add a couple pieces back to the piece that where Harriet was going. A couple of concrete goals that we can look at. I think it's important, like with the LAHEAP funding, to support an idea like Harriet is if we could get the Louisiana Housing Corporation to increase the amount that they are going to dedicate towards retrofitting. There is a huge need to help people pay their utility bills right in that moment. But we also have to start investing some of that money in long-term rehab and renovation in order so that they don't always need the assistance. Because one of the things that's key to these programs is that you can't get help. You may need help every month paying your utility bills, but you don't get help every month. And so we've got to figure out how to balance meeting that emergency need with actually making a long-term investment that lowers the utility obligation, one, for that family, and two, again, reducing overall emissions. And we should also be tying that to some statewide goals. Louisiana has the highest energy cost burden in the country, second highest energy cost burden in the country. We need to be putting together some recommendations to get ourselves, again, stop being number one in all the bad ways. And again, that has the added benefit of making so more people can preserve their housing, they can actually afford their housing, but it also, again, connects back to the overall topic that we're organized around, which is, affecting emissions and grappling with climate change. And then Harriet also mentioned there are some other concrete ways we can talk about resiliency, and it's built in and access to, putting affordable housing in harm's way. So making sure that all communities are doing their affirmatively furthering fair housing analysis, and then actually making the investments that include that, so that you're not putting the cheapest housing in the highest risk areas. There are other metrics. There are other review processes that we just simply have to align with and support. That doesn't call on this group to go out and reinvent the wheel. That is, hey, they have a whole car over there and they're going in the same direction. Let's get in the car with them instead of starting all over. And those are two big concrete issues where we can do it. And the third one I wanted to lift up in front of everybody is dealing with resiliency when it comes to disaster. We don't have a housing trust fund that has a dedicated revenue source. This is a huge problem. So when a disaster happens, Louisiana, which can normally get a lot, and most communities you can get the funds reimbursed by FEMA to support people when they have housing crisis. We don't have a trust fund. So we're always scrambling to find money. And so we need to be talking about an emergency housing trust fund. So when things happen, when a hurricane hits, when a polar vortex rolls through, when people's pipes break, that instead of waiting for FEMA to reimburse us money that we don't really have, and again, recognizing the fact that this is Louisiana, we're always going to be in a budget crunch until we can stabilize we can bring more equity and more opportunity to this community, to this state. We're always going to be in somewhat of a budget crunch. So let's make some of these strategic investments now. We know we're always going to be scrambling for hotels when a hurricane hits. That's not a surprise. That's not that's not anything it's not a surprise. And so why do we then have to get into this conversation with FEMA? And you guys, we see it every single time there's a disaster. The folks of Lake Charles just went through it, where there's all this moving around, like how long are the people going to get to stay in the hotels? And that's tied to the fact that we've got to get the FEMA reimbursement programs. We don't need to do all of that. We can be strategic and mitigate risk in a real substantial way. Because that allows us to let people know that we are grappling with the results of climate change, and we are, instead of just throwing up our hands and saying it's an act of God and everybody's just got to lump it. We need to be proactive on all fronts, not simply the large, long-range goals, but the immediate crises that climate change is wreaking on our communities.
Thank you, Arnica. Great points. Kent, I saw your hand a second ago. Do you want to still jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate a couple of things that Harriet said about the federal infrastructure bill and some of the stuff coming down from federal highways and USDOT. We here in the Shreveport area have consistently over the years taken some of our federal highway funds, transferred them over to the transit system to convert their buses to lower emission vehicles. And in some cases, we've helped them purchase 5 electric buses. We're working to help them do that again. So there are some ways to take those traditional highway type related funds and spend them on transit related issues. We also help them look at their entire system where it used to be a traditional hub and spoke type of system, and then convert that into smaller like neighborhood routes with just a few of the minor hub and spokes, so the whole system runs a lot more efficiently. Each and every bus now has bike racks attached to them, so we're doing multiple things to help make that system more reliable and more efficient in the area also.
Justin, do you have something to add in?
It's not on transportation. It's kind of federal funding opportunities combined with like ongoing state programs. So like I want to return to Louisiana Watershed Initiative. It's funded by HUD. It's CDBG MIT dollars, mitigation dollars. And in the action plan, they promote nature-based solutions and just the sort of things I was talking about earlier. And one of the opportunities I see moving forward is they're currently funding H&H models, hydrologic and hydraulic models for all the watersheds across the state, which will give us a better understanding of flood risk. But this whole idea of these natural areas and and reconnecting floodplains as a way of mitigating flood risk is also going to reduce our emissions. And so as this program rolls forward, there's going to be a state watershed plan and there's going to be regional watershed plans. And it would be great to ensure that these climate goals, these climate targets are reflected in that planning process as a way of really weaving this through multiple state agencies and multiple state programs so that when the CDBG MIT dollars that are funding this initiative standing up now run out and this program can stay, we still have all of these ideas existing across state government that are making sure people are sharing ideas and recognizing opportunities to have some of these impacts on reducing emissions while reducing flood risk.
Yeah, Kim, are you involved in that too? Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thanks. Just to kind of add on really briefly what Justin was saying, I think, one of the things that would be really great is if, as we're talking about the desire for conservation areas or large scale green space areas, that we set criteria that has, provides multiple benefits for whether that property is purchased or how it's prioritized for set aside, so that as we're going through this process, we're layering those benefits for, conservation, for climate benefit, for flood storage and resilience. And then, identifying areas too, maybe that could, if preserved, might incentivize a more compact development form in local communities, so that then we're providing those additional benefits of better transportation and mobility options, better health outcomes, just a better development form. And so less sprawl. So I think that, thinking about all of these things together as we're, layering these solutions, I think we could really identify some real fantastic opportunities.
Charles, I remember the federal funding point that I wanted to make in my last comment as well, is that just as that transportation funding is shifting, right? We see FEMA funding, the pre-disaster mitigation program has gone away. It's now building resilient infrastructure in communities, BRIC, and it's being funded a lot more than PDM ever was. And it highlights nature-based solutions as a priority, as a preferred approach. The Army Corps of Engineers has been putting out documentation and guidebooks on this, and has been shifting towards trying to figure out how to work it more into their approaches, and even has a podcast on it. It's a little dry, I'll admit. And then even in last year's Water Resources Development Act in both the House and the Senate, they had statements to prioritize nature-based solutions. So we see this big shift in funding that goes towards this more resilient and more climate-friendly approaches to this, to the challenges that Louisiana faces on a yearly basis.
Thanks, Justin. I'm going to go to Camille next, but I do think that reminds me that kind of one element of this is sometimes to tap into the federal funding, you have to have a state match, or at least some kind of state put in. And I just wondered if folks had ideas there about how we can either, use some of the existing dollars more efficiently, smartly. I think we've heard some of that already, but also are there new dollars that need to come in to kind of do this? Anyway, just kind of wanted to raise that, especially with the BRIC program. I think everybody's going to want to see some pay in for us. But Camille, I want to give it to you first.
Yeah, well, actually, it's related to this. One opportunity I think that we can take advantage of is the partnership between the state of Louisiana and several different federal agencies for coastal restoration, which is the QUIPRA task force. And so that's a partnership between the Army Corps, EPA, USGS, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to restore coastal Louisiana. And so there's longstanding funding there for restoration projects, and it is a great opportunity for us to tie carbon sequestration as a co-benefit to those current restoration plans, so that we can leverage both of those programs and be successful. And then another point is, just based on what everybody is saying, it sounds like a really useful exercise might be to, as Harriet mentioned, go through a specific example where we, in my mind, I think in spreadsheets, we just have a column and just list all of the multiple benefits, as well as the multiple sources of funding and potential for leveraging for each of these different examples. I think that would be helpful.
Sounds really practical. I don't know who was first, Alex or Harriet. You want to kind of continue this thought?
I just had two thoughts about this based on what's been said. I love the spreadsheet idea that Camille had. Remember that CDBG is kind of like typo blood. It's like a universal donor. So one of the interesting things that you might be able to persuade the federal government to do is to allow federal funds, federal formula funds, to be considered match for other federal programs, like HUD dollars are often considered, because the federal government is really interested in states swinging their formula money into this set of priorities. So if you were to suggest that even if it's only on a temporary basis, let's say for the next 4 years, that you could use federal formula dollars as a state match for discretionary federal programs or for things like BRIC, that could be very appealing to them because they want you to use your formula dollars differently. So that's kind of one specific thing. The other thing is capacity. So, what Ms. Morris was talking about in terms of people and how people are experiencing these difficult times. I mean, you're also trying to transition the entire state into a different economy, right? And into different skills. I mean, think of the complexity of what we're talking about. How to do this effectively, you have to not just know your own program, you have to know a whole bunch of other programs. The Watershed Initiative, you have to understand those models. You have to know the risk. You have to be able to, to know a lot more. So 2 things. Maybe out of your office, Charles, a circuit rider program for some of the parishes that don't have a lot of capacity so that staff can be seconded from the state to work in parishes to help these parishes apply for the same money we're talking about, right? And help them with their capacity, but also, build that capacity building into these programs so that they are being able to hire and develop staff that can help them meet these challenges going forward, because it is going to be increasingly complex and you're not going to ever be in the money if you can't put these things together, right? Much less, meet the ambitious goals of the state. So just don't forget about how variable that is. You have a lot of talent on this call, but that is not, how well-resourced or high capacity every parish in Louisiana is.
Yeah, thanks, Harriet. I do have a grant out now, hopefully asking for something very similar to that. So we'll see how that goes. But that's a super great point. Alex, can we go to you next? And then I think we might want to switch gears a little bit to a new topic. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. So just something that we're not doing in the state much, and I think that there's probably opportunities for federal funding on the science side is things like air quality. If you look at across the state over the last 10, 20 years, the state has really just, maybe even before that, the state's done incredible work on water science. And if you look at the, universities, government, private sector, we're really a national leader when it comes to water science. But we're really not in that kind of position when it comes to air science and air quality. And, there are a lot of federal funding programs, National Science Foundation, EPA, NOAA, many of the federal funders of science that people like myself go after for water related funds also fund air related programs. And I think if we were to build up our talent at the universities, at the community colleges, in the private sector, at our government agencies, in terms of air quality, I think that we could do a lot of good. We could capture we could be in a good position to capture a lot of outside funding in terms of air quality. And everyone loves to fund a data gap, and we're a gap, and we're kind of a gap in terms of that. So I would throw out establishing competitive research programs that could pull in that kind of science funding for air quality as something that we should go after.
Thanks, Alex. We had earlier this week, we talked about some research needs, and I don't know if that came up, but that's definitely something to kind of throw in that list. If it's okay, I'd like to just kind of have us switch our thinking just a little bit to kind of some of the ways that we've been thinking about how to kind of like optimize some of our mitigation measures to meet adaptation goals. Are there any times where we have to kind of maybe where the mitigation goals might be taking us away from our adaptation needs or resilience goals? I'm thinking about, if not done right, some of these electrification pushes. Can we just kind of think a little bit more about this vulnerable state that we're in, and are there ways to kind of just try to make sure that mitigation is we are fulfilling both sides of it the whole time, and maybe to also thinking about just given our disaster prone nature, are some of these new infrastructures that might need to come in like solar or wind, are we making sure that we're thinking about kind of the resilience needs and kind of the design specs that might need to be built into some of those things as they're coming in? We don't want to start over at a kind of unresilient space with some of these newer infrastructures. And then the final thought, just kind of on this kind of like flip side version, is, are there some of these mitigation ideas that are really might make a lot of sense other places, but might want to be reprioritized for Louisiana, or just kind of tweaked a little bit so that we don't, it might be the cheapest way to go, but maybe in Louisiana, we kind of have to do the slightly more expensive version because we know we're going to have a storm or a flood or a drought. I just wanted to see if anybody had any thoughts about tweaking some mitigation things to make sure that we stay in line with adaptation goals, if anybody has a thought there. And if not, we can go somewhere else too. But I guess, like, specifically, is there any discussion about just kind of maybe evacuation needs, some of the transportation aspects of it, maybe electric vehicles and things with kind of evacuations and hurricanes? And maybe there's a super simple solution that I haven't thought of, but I just want to kind of raise some of these little, fault points maybe with some of these things in our context. Yeah, Alex?
Well, one thing to think about on the transportation front is public transportation, right? And resilience, because, public transportation tends to be, large structures, right? So, buses, trains, those are good ways of moving lots of people. And so, in a disaster situation, that has some potential to move a lot of people. If we have, we had working rails, passenger rail service between New Orleans and Baton Rouge and other places, that'd be a good way to move, potentially be a good way to move people, move a lot of people in a storm. So I would, I'd say that. On the sort of in-state, out-of-state thing, just maybe it's a little bit of a different conversation, but I'll just throw it out there to think about, across the country, a lot of things we're hearing about for solutions is electric cars, because in many parts of the country, vehicles are your number one emitters. But here in Louisiana, our biggest emitters are industrial. I think about 60% of our greenhouse gases come from industry. So just to think about when we're thinking about solutions, certainly there's a lot of benefits to electric vehicles. But, just keeping in mind the math that a lot of our emissions come from the industrial sector. So I'll just keep that as part of the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And then Bethany, I saw your hand, and then Kim.
I would just say, whether you're talking about disasters or just general pressure, I don't think there's enough conversation about, so Louisiana has some benefits when it comes to electric vehicles. We're the cheapest state in the nation when it comes to electricity. At least we were. I think if we're not, we're still at the bottom. So there's a lot of opportunity there. The flip side is, if you think about the disaster that was already the electric grid in Texas, and then if you multiply that by nobody could leave because they couldn't power their cars, there's a real concern that there's some discussion about batteries, but I don't hear a lot of discussion about the pressure that's going to put on an electric grid when people stop using fossil fuels and start using electricity. And of course, electricity still has to be created somewhere. So there's still some waste involved. That's a little bit off topic. And then the second part with electronic vehicles is broadband. And if we don't have a solid broadband system throughout the state, then you're really talking about an equity issue where places are going to be able to use and benefit from electric vehicles without the broadband particularly if you're talking about autonomous vehicles, then you really have some issues. So the system that's behind, it all sounds good on the front end, electronic vehicles and where we're moving. And certainly when it comes from a passenger standpoint, there seems to be a lot of pressure in that regard. But I don't think we haven't even started to have the real conversations about what that means to a grid and what do we do as a backup plan if that grid goes down like something in Texas.
Thanks, Bethany. And Kim, I know you work in that space too.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. We do have that conversation in our office, Bethany, about the electric grid and the future of transportation network, but that is a big question. just one of the things that's come up recently in talking with our transit agency here has been, their desire to move toward electric buses, but the tension between that and the fact that they're also called upon to do mass evacuations, and the range that those electric buses can carry passengers is, a question mark for them in terms of being able to also provide that evacuation service. So I think thinking about transitioning fleets in a staged way so that the infrastructure is in place, for them to make those longer trips if needed. I think that was one conversation that's come up recently in my office. And then the other thing I would add is related to kind of this question about solar farms and development, because there's been a couple applications in our region that have come forward, and there are some questions about stormwater runoff created by those developments and kind of how those development standards are put in place and what those standards are. And so I think just thinking through some of that shifting infrastructure, land use development patterns is important.
Harriet, I see your hand too. Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to say with respect to the point that was made about electrification, given the industrial nature, given how much is kind of freight transport on roads in Louisiana, and the fact that the current incentives for electrification are pretty regressive. Most low and moderate income households never buy a new car. In fact, most smart people don't buy a new car. They buy a used car. And right now the tax benefits aren't available. Maybe focus entirely on fleets and on larger, heavier duty vehicles, knowing that the battery technology isn't completely there yet, but just making that your kind of stated intention. So buses, you could definitely be doing buses now. You could be doing school buses now, and the large packs of batteries associated with those vehicles also make them do double duty if they can be bi-directional in terms of providing emergency energy supplies to critical infrastructure or shelters. So some of the buses you don't want to leave, right? If people are sheltering in place, you might need that energy to fuel those critical facilities. But that might be an explicit Louisiana specific move that you chose to make.
Is that something that you would have to specify in some kind of RFP, or is it widely available enough that would show up automatically in some of the choices?
The choices for buses?
For bidirectionality, yeah.
I think it's both. Yeah, I think you can just specify it in your procurement. I think that's what you could do. But I think you have some talent on this call with the municipal utilities to be able to talk about other kinds of arrangements that can support battery to grid applications, which might be useful in the state period.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we lost Jeff Arnold. Were you on? You were on earlier kind of talking about, but I think we lost Jeff, unfortunately. Mark Goodson, did you have a comment a second ago?
Hey, thanks, Charles. Kind of bummed. I'm driving to Shreveport through a rainstorm and I keep losing service, so I'm not able to participate much. But I wanted to get this in. All the good talk about demand side management and federal funding. Already more coming around broadband, in particular in rural areas, and that's a great way to. It has a lot of benefits and impact, but to reduce vehicle miles in particular when folks are able to connect remotely to work and other goods and services, especially if they're in.
Oh, Mark, I think we lost you. Shoot. I think we lost Mark there. Ken, you want to bring up your comment here about the Harriet mentioned kind of the regressive nature of EV bills. I think it might be going away entirely. Can you bring up that consideration you just put in the chat?
Yeah, there's Senate Bill 8 was introduced, and I think it only had 2 folks vote against the initial introduction of it, which was a proposal to accelerate the sunset date of the 2,500 tax credit or the 10% valuation credit from the purchase of electric vehicles to have that sunset as of July 1 this year, rather than roughly, I believe it's another year and a half. So it accelerates that sunset. There's a tax credit going away for purchasing EV vehicles now. So you're just correct. We're going in the wrong direction if we're trying to incentivize electrification of vehicles.
Yeah. So I've got one more question I want to ask, but I wanted to see if a couple folks just mentioned that we are, heavy industrial users in the state. And I just wondered if there was anybody on the line today that wanted to kind of speak to some of the resilience challenges that they're having or needs that they're having, and see how we can kind of combine on that front. I don't know, Gray, if your project's far enough along, or if there's somebody else that's here that wants to kind of think about or Tom, yeah, from the industry, big user point of view.
Thank you, Charles. I'll speak at some risk on behalf of our committee because we have not congealed around a list of topics yet. But perhaps a bit of background. The decision was made to divide the oil and gas sector into the upstream and the downstream committees. So even though I'm on the mining and oil and gas committee, that is an upstream committee. So that's from the wellhead to the pipeline. A lot of the questions that are now being discussed are really around the downstream aspect of the oil and gas committee. And I believe that ended up in the manufacturing group. But still, from an organizational standpoint of the task force, carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration went to our committee. And that's our number one item. It was mentioned earlier by someone. I've resisted jumping in because of the problems I'm also having with connectivity. But let's accept some significant percentage. I've heard 60% mentioned a few times of our greenhouse gases come from manufacturing, many of them petrochemical related. Again, that is part of another committee, but the capturing of that carbon from those facilities and other carbon sources, and then the utilization and sequestration is part of our remit, and we're very excited about moving this forward. Louisiana, someone mentioned earlier, we don't want to be last on all of the good list and first on all the bad list. Well, this is a case where we're first on the good list. We have ample sources of carbon. We have ample pipelines in place to transport that carbon. We have potential users of that carbon. And certainly we know the geology underneath our state for sequestration of that carbon, depending on whether we want to use or sequestrate the carbon. So CCUS is a very big part of what our group is working on. I think we've got the right people from the public sector, academia, and the private sector involved. All of those skills will be necessary to pull this forward, but Louisiana could absolutely be the leader in our country, if not the world, in CCUS.
Thanks, Tom. And Gray, I saw you come online. Did you want to add in something too in this area?
Yeah, sure, Charles. I don't know, what, I know that the call is intended to be about action items. And so I don't know what I could say relative to, a specific action item here. I commend a lot of Tom's comments there. So, I serve on this industry and manufacturing committee, but I don't represent industry, and I don't think there's anyone on the call today that does. We are,
we're a solution provider because we see, as Tom mentioned and others know, and as others have said, so much of our emission in Louisiana, the profile of that is because of the large industrial and manufacturing base of our state. That's something that we try to tackle, and we've tried to tackle it through nature-based for a long time. What drew us to geologic was because of permanence, scale, measurability, and how our geology here is very conducive. And so we definitely do have a lens of trying to balance achieving our environmental goals without sort of creating economic destruction too. Without, we have a lot of our economy is globally competitive. So there's opportunities in there as certain markets become really carbon sensitive and greenhouse gas sensitive. And there's opportunities for, differentiating, labeling, and so forth. But there's also risks, right? As we layer in costs, increase the cost of our raw materials, increase the cost of energy production, and certainly those that are least in the most vulnerable position or least capable of sort of absorbing those costs can sometimes be most impacted by them. So yes, on the industry and manufacturing committee, I would say with those sort of things, those perspectives in mind, efficiency is like a no lose, kind of part of the discussion that several folks on the committee are really focused on and are more capable than myself because they're very, scientific and process oriented, and it's their area of expertise. But efficiency is one that, and how we drive that and incentivize that. And it's obviously no lose. And then to the extent that we don't, and I understand there's differences of opinions out there about this, but to the extent that we, do want to, actually have domestic manufacturing, and do recognize that in the end, whether it's Obama's Energy Secretary, Dr. Ernie Moniz, or recently has been a big proponent of this, Bill Gates in his recent book being a big proponent, just really trying to drive the point home that there is simply there is an amount of carbon emission because of the raw materials that we have to use and have to create that's unavoidable. So can we capture it and sequester it? And the answer is yes, we can at great scale. So efficiency and sequestration, particularly permanent sequestration. In this case, we've talked a lot about geologic, huge fan of nature-based as well. And there's been a lot of discussion on this committee because of Buck and others on the committee that are very focused on that, which is great. So that would be, again, I'm sorry, I tried to start off by saying I give a warning that I wasn't going to probably have an action item there, but in the context of reflecting on, I guess as a representative of the industry and manufacturing committee on this workshop today, I would say those are areas that there's a lot of focus around. And again, trying to put it in the context of, being economic creators, job creators, tax base supporters, capital investors, and, assuming that we don't want to destroy that. And so creating solutions that are also good for the environment.
I appreciate those comments. Alex, I see your hand next, and then I think we got a good segue there for some other topics. So go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, just on the CCS, front, clearly, to follow up on my last point about expanding the research base, I think that is clearly one. I think there are some people in the state doing it, but I think that it's certainly an area where more resources and more expertise would benefit the state. So I think, and there are a lot of people around the country that are interested in it, and I think that we should, build up the university network, empower the people that are doing it, and if we need to bring in new talent, attract that talent, because there are so many people thinking about it. But also, while we're thinking about this, also think about the potential risks. A lot of these systems might, involve structures that are at or near sea level and along the coast. And of course, coastal infrastructure that's near the water is at risk of storms and sea level rise. And so I think we'll need to, as we're just having this discussion, we'll need to think about, potential risks. You wouldn't want to, you want to be cautious about if you're going to build a large facility for deep geological sequestration, where you're going to put that in terms of the elevation relative to the floodplain. Likewise, I think we also want to think about, communities that are near these CCS facilities. Probably want to think about that in terms of jobs, and you probably also want to think about that in terms of, any other concerns that you might have about large industrial facilities located near communities, and are there going to be potential pollutants or noise or other industrial activities that might have, adverse impacts. So I think that clearly, we need to have this conversation, and I think it needs to be a full conversation about, trade-offs, costs, benefits, risks, et cetera, as we're moving forward, and to really examine this issue from all angles.
Yeah, appreciate that comment. Gray, did you have something to add back into there?
Yeah, no, I would just really encourage that as well, because, I appreciate a lot of what Alex just said. And I, through involvement, both in this task force and in that committee, for every opportunity there is to, embrace not just what it does for, as a solution for reducing greenhouse gases, not just what it does as a solution for, allowing our current domestic manufacturing base to continue to, flourish, while, again, making it more environmentally responsive, but also the growth opportunity, right? And the candidly, the job creation opportunity that comes around, developing the solution is kind of disproportionately weighted potentially to Louisiana's benefit, because of our unique geology that we have here. Not entirely unique, there's other regions that have it, but it is very conducive. And I heard some things there that just continue to reflect to me, some really, thoughtful and appropriate concerns. And then a couple others that I think relate to a need for, if CCS is going to be a solution, the need for it to communicate out more accurately what it is and what it involves and what it isn't. For instance, there is no large industrial facility involved in a sequestration site. So for folks to, know kind of what it is and isn't, if it's going to be a part of the solution, there needs to be, better, undoubtedly better communication around some of those things.
Great, thanks. And I saw Faye had a comment in the chat, and I wanted to see if I could get you to kind of come on the audio at least and talk about it, because I do think part of being adaptable is being able to pivot. And so we've heard about some new economic pivots, possibly. We've heard about some research that can kind of help us pivot. And you had another example, Faye, of kind of a new direction to kind of go in as a state. And I'd like to see if we can just have a little bit of a conversation about what are some opportunities for Louisiana to pivot as kind of the economy changes and as our priorities change, but also just are we going to be able to do that as well as we probably should? I know other times throughout history, maybe we haven't been able to seize an opportunity. But Faye, talk about a good bring your point up, please.
So Gray actually brought it up, as well as a few other people on the call, but we have a $50 billion restoration plan, but there is a need for mitigation in both adaptation relative to restoration projects in Louisiana. And with that comes an opportunity to really think about workforce needs and goals and how to actually better coordinate with, say, the state's economic development or workforce training programs at the state level versus at the local parish level, and how some of the coastal and climate goals can actually be aligned, may actually be not too different from each other. So where there are opportunities to make that alignment, I think it's a ripe space to be stepping into right now, considering I think this year we have a lot of restoration projects on the ground and more to come.
Completely. Yeah, thanks. Does anybody else have any other examples like that of big areas of alignment that we kind of need to make sure we're coming back to?
Charles?
Yes, sorry. Who's there? Tom, is that you?
Yes, I think probably the second most exciting topic our committee's working on might be an answer to your question, and that is the abandonment of orphan wells. So that is an unfortunate derivative of decades of oil and gas exploration and production in Louisiana and around the country and around the world. But just today, bipartisan legislation was released in Washington for, if you'll allow me to read here, by Representative Lujan, a Democrat from New Mexico, $4.275 billion for orphan well cleanup and state-owned state and private lands, $400 million for orphan well cleanup on public and tribal lands, $32 million for research and development. President Biden has already proposed $8 billion for orphan well abandonment. So if we think about the orphan wells, we'd all rather they not be there. They're there. The companies that are responsible for them no longer exist. So they are, in many cases, leaking methane into the atmosphere. So we remove that leak permanently. We make the environment around that well safer, because the well itself is gone and it's plugged deep into the reservoir. And then kind of following on Faye's comments earlier, people who previously may have worked drilling wells and companies who may have been employed drilling wells and are no longer working due to many factors would have the opportunity to come to work and plug and abandon these wells permanently. So if I understood your question, you're kind of looking for these crossover issues that may also receive some federal funding. Well, I think we've got one, and it's the permanent abandonment of orphan wells.
And I would just ask, my question would be just, is there already an existing program maybe that's being run out of DNR or somebody that can just receive those funds and they can then put it on, scale it up? Or does there need to be new infrastructure to make sure, not infrastructure, but just new kind of systems put into place so that those funds can be put to use immediately to kind of solve this problem and put people to work? Do you have a sense for that?
There is a state orphan well fund that's poorly funded. Whether that would apply to orphan wells on private properties or federal lands or tribal lands, I'm unsure. It may just be for state lands and state water bottoms. But to your bigger point, certainly my humble opinion, and I'm not an elected official, but if suddenly a check were to show up in Baton Rouge to plug and abandon orphan wells on public, private, state, federal, tribal lands in Louisiana, we've got a group that should know how to do this. And perhaps that would be the place where that check should be deposited until the work is done.
Yeah, and I'm thinking too, clearly this is one of these like perfect cross-sectional things. Are there other kind of like lenses we should add to it as we're thinking about where to go first, because their funds probably won't be unlimited. So how do we kind of start prioritizing or knowing where to go first? Gray, I see your hand. Maybe you don't have to answer that question, but just love to bring in other folks kind of thinking about how we can really operationalize some of these really good crossover points.
Well, Charles, this is great. You said at the beginning of the call we had to self-regulate when we thought we were talking too much, but that's probably me. But I'll say one more thing, if I may. And, you know, around the funding mechanisms and how we do get money to try to pay for these things that, and I think there's a whole other workshop on that, but, you know, there are a lot of experts on this call related to, you know, nature-based solutions. I mean, whether it's forestry or whether it's wetlands. And, you know, the thing about, you know, we as a state, particularly on the wetlands issue, you know, I think really need to lean in on that opportunity as well. I spoke about geologic, but as we're growing this as an industry, I think trying to lean in to the voluntary offset market and how that sort of comes and matures, so that because I don't think it's particularly credible at this point. I think it's sort of there's a lot of skepticism around the voluntary offset market and whether or not credits purchased through that market really are, you know, create long-term solutions, create, you know, if it's just sort of greenwashing. And, you know, to the extent that we think, as a, for instance, that I do think this is accurate, that wetlands restoration, coastal wetlands restoration, you know, should be, you know, considered very, you know, kind of high value in that whole spectrum, or other solutions. You know, I've already suggested that Louisiana has advantage from a geologic standpoint for those kind of credits. You know, our policymakers need to maybe be playing a proactive role in how the offset markets and the registries and how they how those offset markets, how they continue to mature, and how those registries and certification services kind of get more and more, I guess, standardized and uniform, so that it's, and I don't mean this in an untoward way, but so that it's clearly representative of the ways that we as a state want to lean in to do things that are good anyway. And on the wetlands example, we know there's multiple benefits of that, but we also have a workforce that's, you know, inclined toward it. We have a lot of intellectual capital around it, as represented by this call. So the point of that being, as far as an action item, not being passive as that sort of market for offsets develops, but really trying to lean in and be proactive, ensure that it orients towards the strengths of our state and what we have to offer, because that's going to be a funding stream that the market's going to drive. It's hard to restore wetlands because there's not usually a lot of money to do it. I mean, there's way less money than need. So because of the value that it can create, if that market can develop in a way that's you know, conducive, then you know, that's a way that our policymakers in the state can try to lean in and be proactive. And I won't raise my hand again, Charles.
No, that sounds good. We are kind of running out of time a little bit, so I would love to kind of just see if there are any other ideas about kind of operationalizing some of these opportunities. Andronika brought up a big one earlier in the call. I do see Alex's hand, so we're just trying to kind of think of some other any things we don't want to miss out on before we kind of wrap up soon. Alex, go ahead though.
Yeah, just I'll second what Gray said about talking too much, but that's partially me. But just to be very quick, I would throw out health money and COVID-related health money, particularly vis-a-vis air quality. A lot of people are talking about COVID, you know, health and respiratory illnesses and respiratory issues now, and I think that anything that we can do to align with atmospheric, you know, atmospheric science in a context where there's funding going for atmospheric research, I think is something that we should look at. So any issues between greenhouse gases, air quality, and health in this sort of COVID-related funding climate, I think could be advantageous to the state.
Thanks, Alex. Buck, I haven't heard from you in a while. Thanks for raising your hand. You're on mute.
Listening to this excellent discussion, one thing that seems to be a common thread to me is public attitude. And I haven't heard many folks in any of the committees talk about the social scientists, what our universities could do in developing public awareness, public outreach, understanding of the importance of all this. And I just want to mention that I think we should consider public social science. Thank you.
Kent and then Harriet.
Yeah, just one last thing. I think the state has a very unique opportunity for, you list up here in terms of coordination with climate resiliency and land use practices and other things, that I think we have a unique opportunity in that many of the MPOs throughout the state, we are also all involved with the watershed and the Watershed Initiative and several other planning factors. I think it would be very interesting and an interesting conversation, but I think it would be a wonderful opportunity to sit down with some of the state legislators and actually put into place some statewide planning efforts in terms of making sure that all of these different things are coordinated together, that there is, instead of there being so many multiple agencies or multiple boundaries within each of our planning areas, that a single planning body is responsible for doing each and every one of these things. It just makes sense to coordinate those efforts and to work with those efforts. Kim can probably weigh in on this, that we're being asked more and more by DOTD to do other types of planning work, and it would just make sense to wrap all of these things up into some sort of a single statewide / regional planning legislation.
Thanks, Kent. I think that kind of came up on our siting infrastructure call earlier in the week, and I know that there's at least been a couple of attempts to get some money to kind of stand something like that up in the state through some of the folks on this call. So I think that's a great point. Harry, do you want to kind of close this out? Yeah.
Sure. You were asking for, kind of what to do next, where to go. I was suggesting in the chat that maybe, there was a lot of engagement on this call, maybe form some small teams, like 2 or 3 people to mock up approaches to a few specific opportunities. Many have been mentioned in the chat. I said transportation, building retrofits, coastal restoration are 3 where there might be particular opportunities. People would try to come up with goals that they're trying to achieve that also maybe align with some of where the administration is going. And then talk about funding, potential funding sources, talk about, a plan, a 10-year plan, let's say, at least, for how you would carry this out and where you would episodically or regularly be able to access funding to achieve your plan, to implement your plan.
I think that's a great next step. And I think if folks on this call or want to keep this conversation going between committees, I think we would love to see that if at all possible. So just thanks everybody for all these great ideas and for this great conversation today. This has been really, really good. And I see some folks kind of adding to your list there, Harriet. That sounds like a great start though. So just to kind of close this out and make sure there's kind of to wrap this up today, we do have, again, we're looking at April 30th for turning in the action proposals. If you're working on those, I hope you've been inspired today to kind of revisit it and make sure that we're kind of hitting as many goals as possible in your actions. And then again, the hypothetical portfolios and surveys are kind of coming out next week for the advisory group members. That's happening really soon. This is more for the public or for anybody that doesn't know where to go to kind of get this form. The action proposals are available in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. You can turn them in by email, by mail. We have a Google form if you want to just kind of jot down some ideas straight into the web. And these are this is where to find it. So that we have a web page with some meeting information and all this stuff here about how to turn in an action proposal. And then finally, you know, that's obviously not the end of the road for these things. It's not just about creating one giant list. We're going to put it together into organized actions and strategies into portfolios. We're going to be trying to evaluate them against our fundamental objectives. We're going to have to revise some actions, hopefully to kind of make them meet multiple goals, kind of tweak them to better achieve all the different fundamental objectives that we've identified. And there will be a trade-offs analysis period too. So we've got a lot of work left to go kind of in this spring and summer, as we kind of get to the fall where we'll have a lot more, you know, getting closer to being at the end in the fall. So I guess now is the time to kind of go to public comment. So I'm gonna, let's see, stop sharing this. Does anybody who's an attendee on the list want to raise their hand and I can give you the ability to speak? You can kind of add a public comment to this conversation. First of all, yes, Jane, thank you. Let me see. Okay, you should be able to go ahead and unmute yourself. Thanks, Jane.
Yes, lovely. I submitted my comment in writing, but I'm also happy to read it to the meeting, and apologies if you hear my puppy barking in the background. Dear committee members, the looming climate crisis in Louisiana is not inevitable. We have the power, the technology, and the growing political will to collectively address this problem now, using tools already available to us. It will require us confronting truths uncomfortable for our business sector, and will require the state government to take leadership on development that does not contribute to our greenhouse gas footprint. Specifically, I would like to counter several things that have come up in today's meeting. A previous speaker mentioned that somewhere around 60% of our emissions come from the industry and specifically petrochemicals, but carbon capture, utilization, and storage cannot possibly address all of those emissions. Chevron's own scientists analyzed the existing viable capacity for addressing industrial emissions through CCS and found that less than a fraction of 1% of emissions can realistically be addressed through CCS. We must do much more than just capture the carbon. A previous speaker also mentioned that Louisiana has, quote, ample pipelines in place for that carbon, but that's also not accurate. Pipelines that carry natural gas are markedly different than pipelines that carry compressed carbon. CO2 must be kept at extremely high pressure and extremely low temperature in order to be transported by pipeline, and those specifications require much thicker pipelines, rated differently than a natural gas pipeline. Implementing any kind of CO2 movement from an industrial site to a storage site would require completely revamping our current pipeline infrastructure or building entirely new pipelines, which would be environmentally catastrophic and alarmingly expensive. Pipelines are also wildly politically unpopular in Louisiana at this point, and building new or bigger ones would be exceedingly difficult. Considering these and many other concerns with CCUS, this committee should be focusing on truly mitigating, that is, reducing carbon emissions, rather than focusing on theoretical technology that can only address a fraction of the problem. This committee could be focused on immediately ending the permitting of massive greenhouse gas emitters in the state as a first step to climate mitigation. If only the following small handful of facilities, which are currently in the permitting process, were denied or construction was stopped on them, it would prevent the release of the following amounts of greenhouse gases. The Formosa Plastics Facility, 13 million tons of greenhouse gases per year. Cameron LNG, 9 million tons of greenhouse gases per year. Commonwealth LNG, 3.5 million tons per year. Driftwood LNG, 9.5 million tons of greenhouse gases a year. Sasol North America cracker, 4 million tons. Eurochem, 4.5 million tons. Magnolia LNG, 2.5 million tons. You get the picture. There are a lot of facilities that we could stop building and stop permitting now to prevent the release of greenhouse gases, and that is where our solution should focus. Thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you, Jane. Does anybody else who's on the attendee list want to raise their hand to make a public comment today? Okay, and I'm also looking at the email, and Jane read hers or spoke hers in instead of having me read it. So I think That's all the public comments I have for today. So I just want to thank everybody again for being a part of this conversation. If you work on an action item, we thank you for that. And if you are inspired to kind of reach across committees and talk to somebody else, kind of follow through on some of this, I hope you'll do that. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you